Somebody once said it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Well, that somewhere is right here on Mojo 50 Radio. You are tuned in to Critical Thinking. I'm your host, Andrew Coppins, your host with the most numbers right here on Mojo 50 Radio. Thank you for finding this little bit of sanity in this insane political and social world. Yes, that's right. You can find me every Saturday right here for your viewing and listening pleasures. That's correct. You can find the show in the video format, live, direct, at the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page. Just hit that up, Mojo 50 Radio. You just search it, you'll find it. Great, grand, wonderful. You can also listen to this show live, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Mojo50.com. I know recently at the end of this week, iHeartRadio had some issues with the feed and everything, so hopefully that is corrected by the time this show airs. But if not, just head over to Spreaker, type in Mojo50 Radio. You'll find us there live, or better yet, just go to Mojo50.com, hit the Listen Live button. No problems over there. Again, you can find me on the social medias at The Coppins Show. And if you're new to the show, you can spell my last name, Coppens, Coppens. You can also head over to the YouTube page for this show. Simply type in Andrew Coppins. You will find not only this show, if you can't listen live or watch live. Now, may I suggest, if you are listening, please, if you can, head over to that Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page, because there are some visualizations in this show that are going to be very important to a game that we're going to be playing and to really understanding some of the topics that we're going to be discussing. With that in mind, head over to the YouTube page as well, because not only will you see this show in its entirety, you will also see this little morsel of critical thinking throughout the week, and that little morsel is called Food for Thought. The basic premise is, going from Saturday to Saturday and communicating to you guys, while wonderful and grand, there's just stuff that gets missed in the middle, and questions that I think are important to set up not only for the show, but also to really kind of push the conversation forward as a society. So those food for thought questions are something like this, which was this week's question. What if the government was the source of the problem, re student loan debt? And if so, sub-question, can we trust them to really fix this issue? Now, you may say that doesn't seem all that important, but over 15% of all Americans have massive student loan debt. And if you want to know the truth about this, considering Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and some other front-runners within the Democratic Party are considering doing what? Canceling student loan debt. This is something that will affect every single taxpayer in America in a major way. So I recommend heading over, checking it out, subscribing, and that way you don't miss food for thought that is in between these weekly shows. Now, as for today's show, this is just the second of the 2020 shows. It is going to be impeachment-free radio. That's right, folks. I know you want impeachment-free radio because, well, frankly, I absolutely refuse to take an unserious pair of charges seriously. That, and I cannot believe that the Dems this week, what did they do this week? They actually trotted out Lev Parnas, who is under federal indictment for literally lying, obfuscating, covering up the truth. And then he comes out and contradicts their own witnesses in the impeachment inquiry's testimony. Yes, Democratic-leaning and full-on Democrats who testified at this impeachment inquiry hearing. Lev Parnas, and we're supposed to believe him, right? Lev Parnas' testimony impeaches their own witnesses' testimony. So, come on. Seriously? We're supposed to take any of this seriously? I don't think so. So congratulations. You walked in somberly marched your little impeachment articles over to the Senate this week. Congratulations. It's a foregone conclusion. Donald Trump will not be removed from office, and it looks more and more like 2020 is Donald Trump's year because the Dems can't get out of their own way. All right, so if we're not talking impeachment, we have got to talk about what in this show? Well, one, we're going to talk about the FBI getting slapped down in the Carter Page saga, but most conservative media will tell you the appointee in the FISA reform case is a hack, and I'm going to get into why that may or may not be the case. I'm also going to tell you why we need to rethink our entire thought process when it comes to war. The Australian fire situation gives us a great example of how badly needed critical thinking is in this country and around the world from all sides. And I'm going to introduce the theme for this show in 2020. You'll want to stick around for the final segment of the show. It is called Changing Our Culture. In the final segment of the show, like I said, thanks to not one, but two horrific stories of the past few weeks, this is a perfect time to introduce the theme, and mainly because it's also the second show of 2020. So as we go throughout the year, you will find out why this is the theme, why we're highlighting it. You'll want to either fast forward, if you're interested, all the way to the end of the show, or stick around. I say stick around. But first, it is time to have a little bit of fun here on the show and not be so serious all the time. This is a game that I'm introducing and something I talked about in the first show of 2020 and just couldn't get to in time. But it's a game that I'm calling Babylon Bee or Real News. The concept is really simple. I'm going to give you a headline and a few paragraphs of the story. You decide if this is a real news story or if it's something that the Babylon Bee would produce. Now, of course, there are some minor tweaks that will be made to headlines and the story, mainly to protect the names of the innocent, if you will, catch my drift here, but basically to protect the integrity of the game and the people that might or might not actually be involved in a real news story. But it won't materially change the point. Reminder, you, my fine friends, can play along in the comments section on Facebook and via Twitter. You get to guess Babylon Bee or Real News by just simply using the hashtag Babylon Bee or Real News. On Twitter, follow at The Coppin Show, and you can also comment on the video on the Facebook page. The first person that gets this correct on the Facebook page and on Twitter, by the way. So, get to your Twitter machines, get to this video live on Facebook. The first person to get this correct is winning some swag from the show, courtesy of our new friend here at Mojo 50 Radio, Sovereign Rising Printing. Sovereign Rising Printing uses a method called sublimation printing, which basically allows for more accurate color and less chance of fading when compared to some online t-shirt shops that use the digital-to-garment printing methods. And I'm sure you've seen those t-shirts that are out there. They basically look like they're faded already. There's a lot of lack of quality when it comes to these things. And Emily, the founder, by the way, uses only 100% polyester clothing to allow for the highest quality printing and less chance of shrinkage, which is always a plus in your clothing needs and elsewhere, Dominic Izzo. Anyway, most requests can be processed within 48 hours, and most orders, like 40 t-shirts and 40 tumblers, could be done in one weekend, courtesy of Sovereign Rising Printing. As was near and dear to Doc's heart, this small business was partly born out of necessity and out of passion. You see, Emily's 9-year-old son suffers from autism, and following some abuse at school, she's now homeschooling her son. Thus, the need to find a business that she can do largely from home. And I've seen the quality work done by Emily, and I'm retooling my thoughts on merch for this very show due to the quality of her own work. As a result, those of you who are first to correctly guess this week's hashtag Babylon Bee or Real News will win swag that I'm working with Emily to produce. Basically, you're going to win a t-shirt. You could win a tumbler. There might be some stickers involved. Emily's business has grown so fast that she's already had to retool her website, and that is in the works right now, and already looking to hire people to assist in printing. So I would consider that to be a pretty ringing endorsement of what she is doing. So if you're interested in having your company swag or one-off orders done right, consider Sovereign Rising Printing. You can get a hold of Emily right now via email at mrz.emily@gmail.com. Again, that's mrz.emily@gmail.com. That's right, folks. It is now time for the game show that will sweep across the nation. Babylon Bee or Real News? Today's headline: Alderman proposes conception fees, childbirth licensing after infant's death. the story. Incensed by allegations of child abuse and the death of an infant in his ward, Alderman Ray Lopez fired off an incendiary tweet suggesting parents be licensed before having kids. Tired of these sick bastards killing babies because they are too immature to be parents, the alderman tweeted Thursday about child abuse case in the neighborhood that he represents. Time to start requiring childbirth licensing, conception fees, or toddler escrows in order to be a parent. If love doesn't motivate good behavior, perhaps hitting their pockets will. So what do you think? I will give you 5 seconds to get to typing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes, that is right. This is a real story, and it comes from the Chicago Sun-Times, as Alderman Ray Lopez of the 15th Ward here in the city actually said those things. This is a great glimpse into what Lopez and others on the radical left here in America really think about childbirth and raising children to begin with. What Lopez was reacting to was simply the news of a 9-month-old baby being beaten to death by his dad. No doubt it was awful news. But that is not a rational argument being made. What it is just emotional. And what if he just didn't really mean it? Well, Lopez would go on to say this to the Chicago Sun-Times, quote, I don't think that there's any way that we can truthfully license people to have children. This is not China. We're not a communist country with childbearing laws, said Lopez, one of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's most outspoken city council critics. But as we're seeing more and more stories of parents who are ill-equipped to raise children, parents who are not nurtured in a way that allows them to nurture children of their own, we have to, as a society, start addressing this before stories become the norm. Before these stories become the norm. Lopez would then go on to suggest, wait for it, my friends, mandatory parenting classes for anybody expecting their first baby, and you can guess it. Guess who's going to end up paying for those classes? Oh, and what do you do to a parent that doesn't listen to your mandatory order, right? Push the baby back into the delivery room? Push it back up the birth canal? Tell the doctor he can't deliver unless those parents provide that certificate of completion. Oh, maybe even better yet, the kid would be automatically placed into the foster care system until the parents satisfactorily complete the course the government mandates. My God, it is all idiotic. And yet we live in a world where these kinds of people are being given real power to affect your day-to-day lives. This isn't somebody in Washington, D.C. just doing an abstract. This is somebody who is literally affecting your day-to-day life if you live in Chicago. And my God, Chicago, when are you going to pull your head out of your ass when it comes to this stuff? How is this guy representing a ward? How is this guy being taken seriously? I'm not going to hold my breath at all, though, because this is the exact same city that's now charging over $4 in fees just to get an Uber or Lyft or Via into the downtown area, and the same city whose residents have elected not one, but five different Democratic Socialists of America members to the city council. Is it any wonder why people are leaving this city and the state in record droves? Just saying. So from one piece of idiocy to another, and this, my friends, is all about the lack of critical thinking. This is why this show exists. This whole thing here, friends and family that I speak with often, they ask me why I've called the show Critical Thinking. Why not just the Andrew Coppins Show? Well, pay attention to this next topic, the Australian brush fires, for all the reasons as to why we need to raise awareness of the need to restore critical thinking. This is not a left issue. This is not just a right issue. This is a whole society issue. How the blue hell people are not able to critically think in this scenario should be troubling to every one of us. Now, if you haven't been paying attention, one of the biggest stories on social media and in the international media circus has been the brush fire situation in Australia. It is really horrific where some of these fires are and how much they're affecting not only wildlife but human beings as well. Now, climate change activists, they've attempted to use this as a battle cry for whatever crazy government scheme that they can possibly think up. Now, on the right-leaning side of things, politicians and talking heads have bought a lie because it fits into their wish to see these climate change narratives die a horrible death. It all adds up to not being able to, virtually trust anything that's actually going on. Now, let's start with some of the obvious lies, okay? Some of the really obvious ones, which really started early this month here in January, as somebody in Australia put up a visualization, and this is why, if you're listening, please head over to either the Facebook page for Mojo50 or my YouTube page if you're listening via podcast. So let's go ahead and start with some of these obvious lies that are happening, which really started earlier this month here in January, as somebody in Australia put up a visualization saying, please pray for us in Australia. Pray, pray, pray. Because the brush fires are out of control. Now, if you're not watching this show live, you're listening live, please, if you can, head over to the Facebook page for Mojo50 Radio. And if you're listening via podcast, head over to the YouTube page, search Andrew Coppins. You're going to want to see this, okay? So the image that you're seeing on the screen right now is supposed to be an accurate representation of what is happening with those brush fires. As you can see, the heat map is one nasty-looking thing. It kind of spread like a brush fire, if you're pardoning the horrible pun, if you will. There's just one problem. It was purported to be using NASA satellite imagery, only it is actually just a digital representation of fire data and not even accurate fire data. I mean, even freaking PolitiFact had to rate this picture completely false. And Facebook, by the way, won't even let you see the photo without a warning about its falsehood. Yet, it spread like crazy and continues to make the rounds on social media around the world as if it is the gospel truth. Now, what you're about to see in front of you is the image of the brush fires that have occurred in fire season in Australia, released by NASA. For those not watching, the image is about 1/10 as intense as the one spread at first. Turns out that fear has a powerful hold on people, especially when you can make it political in nature. Now, climate change activists would love you to believe that this giant country full of orange to be the truth, because it serves both Australian and international climate change agendas. But they're not alone in this whole disinformation campaign, as I noted at the top. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Arson is the biggest reason for these brush fires. 200 people have been arrested for starting fires, and climate change not really a factor at all. Well, facts are a stubborn thing, and according to authorities in Australia, things are very different from what either side is telling you. So let's go over the actual facts here, as Australia's ABC gives us state-by-state information. That is correct, ABC over there. So here's the news from ABC, if you will. Only about 1% of the land burnt in New South Wales, which is, I believe, where Sydney is actually caused by arson. Even less in Victoria. So, the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, Inspector Ben Shepherd, said earlier this week, lightning was the predominant responsible cause of the brush fire crisis. Quote, I can confidently say the majority of the larger fires that we have been dealing with have been a result of fires coming out of remote areas as a result of dry lightning storms. In Victoria, where about 1.2 million hectares has burned, only 385 hectares, or 0.03%, have been attributed to suspicious circumstances. So, think about this. The Busby Flat Fire, which burned through some 51,000 hectares of land and destroyed 44 homes, may have been deliberately set. So, that's it, right? Okay? Got it? But then it goes on to say that this week, a New South Wales police media release revealed that 24 people have been charged over deliberately lit brush fires this season. However, the majority of suspected arson relates to small grass fires and rubbish bins set alight, which have inflicted negligible damage and burnt a tiny area compared to with fires that are sparked by lightning. In Victoria, more than 1.3 million hectares have been burnt so far this season. It says that no arson figures are available for the brush fire season, but in the 12 months to September 2019, that is that is right up to the brushfire season, a dozen people have been arrested for causing brush fires in South Australia. Okay? None of the deadliest or most destructive fires are being treated as suspicious. 2 fires, which have blackened more than a third of Kangaroo Island and killed 2 people, are believed to have been sparked by lightning strikes. The Cuttle Creek blaze in Adelaide Hills, which started in catastrophic conditions and killed 1 person, destroyed more than 80 homes, was caused by a tree that fell on power lines. A tree falling on power lines. Police said that 10 people in South Australia have been reported or arrested for intentionally or recklessly causing a brush fire since September. So far we know of 34. 34 people being arrested. Not 200. Queensland, let's go there. Well, guess what? Okay, this is where things get interesting. 72% are undetermined in this area. Queensland police said that there have been 1,068 reported brush fires between September and January 8th, 114 of which had been deliberately lit. So, even if we got to the 200 number, okay, we've got 114 plus 34. That is still not 200. Western Australia, the Department of Fire and Emergency Service says about 2.2 million hectares of land have been burned since the start of November. The DFES said 449 of the 1,537 brush fires across the state between November 1 and January 14 were considered suspicious or deliberately lit. In metropolitan areas, it was higher, with 43.6% of the 679 fires being considered suspicious or deliberately lit. Okay? That's the height of all of this. But even if all of those suspicious ones were deliberately lit, that's 449. That changes the narrative completely as well, in considering all of this. But it's still not 200. We only know of about 100 and roughly 50, not 200. And we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of fires throughout Australia. Think about this. This is the narrative that the right wants you to believe, is that climate change and everything else has nothing to do with any of this, right? So what's the takeaway from all of that information I just gave you? It's that anybody that tells you they have a definitive reason as to why these fires are so intense and why they're happening now, is just lying to you. More importantly, if they cannot acknowledge facts on the other side, they're not critically thinking either. I mean, like I said, in Western Australia, it's clear there's a major arson problem. But in places like Victoria, not so much. South Australia, arson problem. New South Wales, not so much either. Yet, you've heard people like Glenn Beck and InfoWars spreading the false narratives of the anti-climate change crowd. And Glenn Beck has tried to claim the mantle of critical thinking. Think about that real fast for me. On the flip side, you've got climate change nuts like Penn State professor Michael Mann making a meal out of lightning strikes. This is called fire season for a reason. It is natural to have fires. Are they increasing? The jury is still out on that fact, actually. So if you're doing real critical thinking, the only conclusion that you could come to is that nature has been kind of brutal, and people aren't helping the matter either. Can we also talk about the arson problem that seems to exist in Australia? I mean, hundreds of fires, if not close to 1,000 of fires, being blamed on arson in a few short months seems rather odd to me. Is this like a nation full of pyromaniacs or something? Alright, folks, on that note, it is time to hit a break right here on Mojo 50 Radio. On the flip side, we're going to be talking about the art of war in the 21st century, and we're going to talk the theme for this show in 2020. That theme, changing the culture. Do not forget, follow me on social media at The Coppin Show and use the hashtag critical thinking. We'll see you on the flip side. thank you so much for sticking around after that little bit of a break. Hopefully you got a chance to reset your mind, because this half of the show, all about some deep dives into critical thinking and themes of the show overall. We've already talked about some crazy stuff, but I think it's time that we pull back a little bit and ask some important questions. Of course, you know me. I'm Andrew Coppins, your host with the most numbers. Follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Parlay, Freedom Hard, basically anywhere you can find social media at The Coppins Show. Coppens is my last name for any of you that are new to the show. Thank you, like I said, for sticking around for the second half of this episode. Now, this second half, like I said, is going to be a deep dive. We're going to talk about the art of war in the 21st century, and we're going to talk the themes of 2020 for this show. And obviously, one of the main themes is always going to be hashtag socialism sucks, but there's going to be an additional theme in place in 2020 for the show, one that doesn't touch so much on politics, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, we have to talk about the art of war in the 21st century. Why are we still fighting basically the same type of wars as we fought in World War II? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look, right? So in World War II, things changed. Trench warfare that was part of World War I and this nasty combat that was really happening in World War I are not really part of the picture in World War II. There's air bombings, there's jets, there's all sorts of new technology that changed the face of fighting. There's the tanks and all the technological things and inventions that really changed the face of how that war was fought. Well, today, we still fight with tanks. We still fight with howitzers. We still fight with, troops on the ground in mass quantities. We still fight in a very force-in-your-face way. Now, yes, technology has changed some of how we fight. It's changed our ability to understand where the enemy is. Satellite imagery, drones, all of those things have somewhat changed how we're fighting. But to its core, we're still sending troops overseas. We are still asking people to put themselves in major harm's way to fight these wars and these battles. Now, when we're talking about fighting in Iraq or maybe even in Afghanistan, I think you could make the argument that we definitely, at least in Afghanistan's case, needed to be there in a massive way, right? We needed to find a way to engage in this conflict and root out the Taliban, root out Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. But when you look at what ended up happening here, it's 2020, and we have now been in Afghanistan for nearly 19 full years. I would make an argument that with our superior technology and with all the things that we are able to do with technology, there should be no on-the-ground troop presence there anymore. Could we have maybe a limited intelligence force and some capabilities? But as we look at the future of conflict, I would make an argument that we don't need the number of ground force troops that we have. We have the best technological fighting force in the world. We can launch missiles from almost anywhere. We can attach MOABs to drones. We can do a lot of things without ever putting a single boot on the ground. Yet, thousands of lives have been lost. Countless more tens of thousands of lives have been forever altered, not only by the fact that loved ones have passed away in this type of a conflict, but also those that are wounded in these conflicts. Now, if we can make a targeted strike at an individual like Qasem Soleimani, why couldn't we also then pull our troops out of harm's way get everybody out, and start fighting wars from here in America. The troops become a technological fighting force. That's what I'm trying to say here, folks, is that we need to move beyond the grunt force, shoot, bang, bang, go door to door, hunt down these individuals. Now, it may take longer to fight wars in the future, but we fought this war in Afghanistan for 19 years, and have we won? I would argue no. The only win that we have is Osama bin Laden being dead. We're talking about making a deal with the Taliban. They're not dead. The easy solution over there would have just been to bomb the ever-loving tar out of the entire country until it was flattened. Until they have nothing left. But you didn't need to put any troops on the ground to do that. Most importantly, what I think the future of war in the 21st century will look like, or should look like, is less ground troops, more mental. And by mental, I mean more technology, using maybe CIA assets overseas, combining that into maybe some sort of technological intelligence agency or military intelligence agency that allows us to fight strategic wars. And what I mean by that is make the case to go to war against Qasem Soleimani. Make the case that we need to go to war with Iran, but make it clear that we're not fighting, and sending troops overseas. We're going to use technology as our weapon of choice. I think the American people would have a much, much easier time making the case that we should be fighting Iran, that we should go after the mullah, or the mullahs, that we should be looking to make sure that their terroristic regimes go down. But I don't think that we need to send troops in. I think if you were to just tell the American people, we have a strategy going forward of war, and our strategy is 1, containment, 2, if you mess with us, we're dropping bombs from drones at you, and 3, make it very clear that we're fighting a cyber war against these individuals. We can jam systems, we can do all sorts of really amazing technological things. It's being done. But I think we can do that at a very strategic level and be peaceful around the world. We can go after terrorists. We could have a relationship with Iran, or we could have a relationship with countries where terrorists may be hanging out and say, hey, look, can we get permission to go in? Now, if we're not given permission, that's a whole different animal altogether. But what are we going to do? Topple the regime with ground troops? It has not worked in 19 years. We haven't learned anything if we don't change the way that we fundamentally fight these wars. We can use the U.S. Naval Academy. We can use West Point. We can use the Air Force Academy and start turning these warriors into mind warriors, into people built to fight wars using their minds and technology and everything else in a much more productive way. That's my thought process on this, is that we've got to fundamentally, we're basically still fighting with World War II tactics. When our enemies are not doing so, we should also be altering how we fight these wars. We no longer need thousands of troops on the ground to be successful. We need to determine the target and eliminate the target. You can send in specialized troops if need be. You can send in the Navy SEALs. You can send in those specialized forces. But the days of infantry fighting should be long gone. We've got the technology to be able to handle this with a joystick and a drone and a GPS satellite. We have the technology to change the face of warfare and make it much easier for us to target the individuals that we want to target rather than just whole cloth going to war in a country. That's what I believe. Hit me up on social media at The Coppins Show, hashtag critical thinking. What say you when it comes to the art of war in the 21st century? Now, I promised that we would talk themes of this 2020 year for the show. It is just the second live episode of this year. That's right. Last week I was out with a wee bit of a wisdom tooth issue, as in got a wisdom tooth pulled and really couldn't speak with you for very long. So, why are themes important is kind of the first thing here. Well, obviously, they really help us go ahead and define what we're looking for and define how we see the world. And basically, with a show that's based off of critical thinking, a theme can really help us put topics into focus. It gives us a lens to see things through and deep dive into the process of critical thinking rather than just simple reaction that you see all over conservative media and leftist media as well today. So what is this year's theme on the show? Besides hashtag socialism sucks, and yes, you can get that t-shirt, that sweatshirt, that hoodie over at criticalthinking.threadless.com. Support the show, support the efforts, and most importantly, money raised will go towards funding the book, Socialism Sucks. Yes, it is going to be all about exposing the myths that modern socialists like to tell us here in America. So, if you want to support that effort, the first thing you can do is buy the t-shirt and buy the sweatshirt and hoodies and all the things that come along with the Socialism Sucks series. But this year's real big overarching theme is going to be changing the culture. Now, yes, the culture war is a thing on the right, and it's been a thing on the left as well for a very long time now. But I'm not so much worried about the war for the culture, if you will. I'm more interested in finding root causes for the devolution of our culture. Now, if you don't believe that we have devolved, let me introduce you to two stories that should shake you to your core. One comes from Brooklyn, and another comes from right here in my home city of Chicago. Now, from Brooklyn, I give you Ami Horowitz's short YouTube documentary video where he talked about the rise of anti-Semitism and what he got out of going into a predominantly black neighborhood in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. That became some of the craziest shit I have ever seen here in America.
There's been a deluge of anti-Semitic attacks in Brooklyn over the last couple of weeks committed exclusively by members of the black community. Over the course of 2 hours, we spoke with local residents as to why they think African Americans in Brooklyn might be attacking Jews. What's going on? What do you think is going on?
You know what I think is going on? Because it seems like I'm not being a racist or anti-Semitic, but
I'm not anti-Semitic, but here's the anti-Semitic trope in 3, 2, 1.
It seems like the Jewish people own all the buildings out here, and they own everything, and they're not sharing nothing. They own everything. They're coming over here, they're taking over, but they're not renting it back to us. See, they're kicking us out. And I don't want to go back to World War II with Hitler and all that. But
also, when you say Hitler and but in the same sentence, that's never good.
It seems like they own all the property. And they don't even try to help us.
Oh, yes! Hitler! World War II! But now for somebody different. The Jews are not American. Brought to you by the youth in Crown Heights.
Coming from their
they not building
our country, and they trying to change up our country to how they live.
They will get the money from here, and they're going to send the money to the country.
Which country? Not in which country?
Not in the United States.
That's not their country.
No.
So you think the Jews here are not really American?
They not.
To be fair, Horowitz actually also found a few people who were willing to speak up, saying that it wasn't right, this anti-Semitism whole trope and thing going around inside that black community in Crown Heights, and that they actually preached love, not hate. But they were the vast minority of the people that Horowitz spoke with, far from the majority, and beyond that, the language and the feeling in these clips is something that Goebbels couldn't have even written better himself, for crying out loud. This is literally Nazi propaganda. This is what the Nazi Party was telling the German citizens to rile them up, allow them to round up the Jews, put them into concentration camps, and save the country. How in the hell does that happen in the supposedly woke world here in America? How? Well, let's move on to the second story that brought about this whole entire theme and idea of changing the culture. This is a horrific shooting happening right here in Chicago this week. One that actually saw 2 young boys shot up in a cold-blooded way at a barber shop. The boys aged 11 and 12 were shot while going to the barber in this barber shop for the very first time ever by themselves. Their mother said, "Go ahead." Now, if you know anything about the African American community, barbershops are kind of not just a place to go get a haircut. They're a lot of times pillars of the community. There are a lot of times where the men of the community kind of gather to gossip and just kind of chop it up in a place that everybody feels safe, right? Well, it wasn't just 2 young boys. There was also a toddler in the shop. 5 people in total were shot. Luckily, the toddler was not shot. Now, the thing that I haven't told you yet is that the gunman apparently walked into the shop, then walked out of the shop after surveying the land, and proceeded to open fire after walking out of the shop. So, they knew damn well there were little innocent lives in that shop. And they directly hit 2 of the 3 youngsters in the shop. It's a sad commentary, but an all too familiar story here in the news of Chicago. Young people caught in the crossfire of whatever the hell was going on. But it's another illustration of the devolution and the change that needs to freaking happen in our culture here in America. This is not a Chicago-specific problem. This is a problem across the United States. A healthy culture doesn't let this kind of stuff ever happen. A healthy culture would mean it's unthinkable to do this, simply because the shame that it would bring upon you and your family. And because a healthy culture does what? A healthy culture teaches one to value life, yours and others, at all times. I'm not saying a shooting like this would never happen if we changed the culture, but it wouldn't happen with the frequency and the callousness that it's happening with right now. So, how do we begin this theme of changing a culture that is as sick as these 2 examples prove it to be? Well, I'm about to lay out some principles that I believe are great places for us to start to get our culture as a country turned around. Up first is this idea that we have to fight reductionism and reductionists. Now, what do I mean by that? Reductionist theory is basically a thing that's on the radical left and the alt-right. And it goes something like this. It's basically stripping a person down from individual aspects to a single defining characteristic and only looking at them through that single defining characteristic. For example, seeing people through the lens of only their sexuality. I am gay, therefore XYZ. I am black, therefore XYZ. Their feelings, or whatever characteristic you would like to pick. That means that you fail to see the rest of their humanity and the individualism. And that means the reductionist can only associate with that single characteristic that you've picked out. Therefore, if you're gay, you can only possibly believe XYZ. Or if you're black, you can only possibly think of XYZ as well. So, right, that's reductionist thinking. And it's not only the enemy of really critical thinking, it's the enemy of a healthy culture. Assuming that you know how somebody thinks or what they believe or how they should act or anything, right? Just because of a characteristic of theirs is about as insulting as it gets. Now, why is this the first part of all of this? Well, because fighting reductionism and reductionists are the baseline of how we begin to flip the culture in America to something positive. When you begin to stop reducing people to a single characteristic and start treating them as an individual, you begin to do what? You begin to see people in different lights, and your worldview could actually change. And it opens your mind up to having to treat people with respect, valuing their lives, valuing their opinions, and noticing that not everybody thinks alike. It is okay to be different. It is okay to not think en masse. And most importantly, it helps you to get at an individual one-on-one conversation. Okay, so you want to change the culture, right? You've got to do a couple of things. One is already fight reductionist and reductionism, but you've got to expect families to be together. And you most importantly have to see positive role models in your life. And that's not happening at a good enough level in American society today. And it's not just a white thing or black thing or Hispanic thing. These things happen regardless of race. Okay? Fatherlessness for me is the number one factor in a ton of really bad things happening to you and the choices made by youth in these types of situations. Some stats for you. 63% of youth suicides come from people who don't have a dad around. Runaways. 90% of all homeless and runaway youths, fatherless. 85% of all children that exhibit behavioral disorders, fatherless. 71% of all high school dropouts don't have a dad around. 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions, no dad in sight. 75% of adolescent patients in substance abuse centers, no dad. 75% of rapists are motivated by displaced anger at their dads. Furthermore, even low-income kids with two parents in the house. This comes from a 2015 study, so it's about 4.5, maybe 5 years old. But even low-income kids with two parents in their home are more likely to be high academic achievers than one-parent households of high-income households. In 1960, 6.1% of all white children lived with only their mom. That is now 18.3%. That is over a 100% increase in just about, 50 years' time? The African American community, 19.9%, less than 20%, lived with their mother only as of 1960. In 2010, that number was 48.5%, and that was actually down from a high in 2000s, or in the 2000s, at over 51%. As for the Hispanic, well, in 1980, 19.6 to 26.3. They have a culture that's different, and the culture within the Hispanic community is one of family, is one of expectations of fathers being in the home. It's just that simple, my friends. Just that freaking simple. And along with that, how do you fight things like fatherlessness and against this age of relativism, if you will, look at marriage? How do you fight that? Well, I think it all starts with this idea, this concept called life. Now, I'm not talking in the sense that many of you would originally think that I was going to talk about when I mentioned life. Not going to talk about abortion, although it's part of the mix here. But what I'm really talking about is fighting to bring back the values of one's individual life. And so that has an aspect in abortion, no doubt about it. But bringing back the feeling that one's life actually matters. Now, right now, there are kids that are joining gangs because their lives, apparently, according to them, do not have any value. That's not because that they think the kids on the corner are the cool kids to hang out with, or that they love the drug game, or that they love guns and violence. It's because they don't have any self-worth. And that we've got to start making those kids feel like they are seen and heard on a much more massive scale. Study after study, like I mentioned, of violent offenders at young ages often show they've got that lack of positive influence in their lives or direction. Young black men are particularly susceptible to this because they are the ones seeing the highest rates of things that would knock them down the social pecking order, if you will. So if you want to change the culture of fatherlessness, the lack of marriage, the lack of all the things, you've got to start instilling value to somebody's life. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, because how do you do that in a society that doesn't put an emphasis on life? Well, I think it's maybe people starting to stand up and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take an interest in this individual. And so you one-on-one mentorship, or maybe it's a teacher taking that interest, or things of that nature. And it's not just, woe is me, woe is me. It's saying, you know what? I think your life has value. Do you? And beginning to flip it. Now, along with that, it comes with this idea that there are standards. If you start to put in guideposts, if you start to have standards along with valuing your life, you can also start to change the culture. We live in this age of moral relativism, right? Laissez-faire, do what you want, be what you want, do what you want, be what you want, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And it's largely part of the libertarian culture, is that this is an individual situation. But the thing that most people miss within the libertarian ideas or ideals is that you cannot live in a society that has no standards. Now, turns out we're about to head into the end of the show. Yes, our time together this week is done. Thank you for tuning in, watching, and participating. I hope you're enjoying the theme of this show, and I hope to really go more in depth on some of the things about changing our culture. Do not forget, you can stay right here on Mojo 50 Radio for my millennial brother from another mother, Matthew Holloway, taking you on the ride through the HollowNet program. Right after this, I'm Andrew Coppins. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and other socials at The Coppins Show. Until next time, and in the spirit of changing the culture, Matthew 5:44.